Hi, I'm Chanel. A case of strangles has been confirmed on the Isle of Man. It's a highly contagious disease that affects horses. I spoke to Raymond, the chairperson of the Manx Horse Council, about it, the situation on the island, and what his advice is for horse owners.
Well, strangles is a common name for a bacterial infection that horses get, and it's caused by a bacterium called Streptococcus equi. It is a very contagious disease, and that's why we treat it with a degree of respect because of that nature that it can spread so readily. Symptoms include usually very mild symptoms, but they can be more severe. High temperatures, not eating, a cough, perhaps a snotty nose discharge from the nose, and then classically swellings underneath the jaw of the lymph nodes.
Right, now, how do horses get it?
Well, the most common transmission is horse to horse. That's the most likely transmission. So one horse touching another horse, spreading the bacterium from their nasal passage, and the horse breathes that in and gets the infection. So that's the most common form of transmission, direct contact. However, there is indirect transmission, and this can be from, say, a horse owner who their horse has got strangles, they're handling their horse, particularly around the head, and then the next thing is they go and handle the next horse. So there is transmission through hands and contact. We can get transmission through what's called fomite transmission. This is transmission through inanimate objects, such as tack, grooming kit and things like that. There is a possibility of spread that way. And of course, the most common thing with horses, perhaps out in pasture, contamination of the water troughs. And the bacteria can live around the water troughs. So one horse that's infected drinks from it, and then another horse comes to drink from it, maybe from another field, and it could be transmitted through the watercourse. So there are lots of ways for transmission.
Right, and how contagious is it?
It is contagious insofar as that it will spread readily through a yard from one horse to another and through just the normal management. So it is contagious. But I think it's very important for people to realise that the actual disease itself may not be severe at all. In some cases, horses can have strangles and the owner is unaware of it. Yes, classically, the pictures that you will read when you Google strangles and whatever, those pictures will show horses with very green nasal discharge and very unwell horses. And there's no doubt that can happen, particularly in horses that are perhaps a little bit older, horses that may have other conditions that might weaken their immune system. So classically, the very young and the very old, they're the ones that perhaps we would be much more careful with.
Well, you've mentioned what the symptoms are. What advice do you have for horse owners?
Well, I think a horse owner should exercise a degree of biosecurity 365 days of the year, not just when perhaps they hear of a strangles outbreak in some part of the Isle of Man. So I think the first thing that I always say, and it's something that you should remember, that when you go to, say, a competition and you're taking your horse into a group, an unknown group, of some many horses perhaps, it's very important that your horse does not sniff another horse. Do not let any other horse sniff yours. So in other words, a degree of separation. I always say that when you go to a competition or whatever, never touch another horse. Don't handle another horse unless you really, really have to, or it's a known horse, and don't let anybody handle your horse. So the transmission of strangles is by direct contact. It isn't going to fly through the air 10 metres like perhaps some viral conditions that can be airborne. Strangles is not like that. It must be direct contact. So I think biosecurity at competitions is something that everybody should exercise, and those simple guidelines are easy to adhere to. We always recommend that any new horses coming into a yard are isolated for 2 weeks and kept very much to themselves. And isolation means not shared airspace, It means no direct contact with anybody else. It means no shared equipment, no shared feed buckets, no shared water buckets. All these sort of things need to be kept essentially in the isolation box. And of course, if you're handling horses and every day they must be fed and every day they must be looked after, start with the clean horses and end up with the contaminated horse or the potentially contaminated one. Perhaps think about wearing protective gloves, perhaps wear waterproofs that can be easily washed down, and having maybe a foot bath of disinfectant by the isolation box that readily would let you disinfect your footwear and perhaps disinfect your waterproofs. And those items could be left at the isolation box with different equipment used for the rest of the yard. And that's a good way of creating what we call barrier nursing. And physically stop the transmission of the bacteria.
How serious are the cases on the Isle of Man?
To be clear, we only have had one identified case at the moment, so only one confirmed case. Now, this is in a small livery yard, which means that there are potentially another 20 in contacts, and that is the concern. But to be fair, the owner of this yard and the owner of the pony are being very community minded and public spirited minded insofar as that they're saying, let the information go out and give everybody good information about what's going on, because with good information you can make good decisions. And as we found with COVID, because there were so many unknown things, people acted irrationally. And some very strange things happened back in 2020 that we may look back on now and say, what were we thinking? But back then we didn't know. Okay, with this Streptococcus equi, we know everything about it. There are no surprises about this bug. So therefore, with that knowledge, we can enforce good biosecurity, we can enforce good disinfection, and we can just shut it down. But to be clear, only one identified case, and that was last week. The incubation period for this disease can stretch up to 3 weeks, which means that we have another fortnight of anxious waiting around, everybody being particularly vigilant for those mild respiratory signs that maybe normally you wouldn't have called your veterinary surgeon out for, but in this particular instance, maybe better be safe than sorry. But we're hoping that we've got it contained. The yard that the outbreak has occurred in is under strict isolation, and that's being adhered to.
And I understand you're also hosting a talk sometime soon where you're going to educate people about infectious diseases?
Yeah, just coincidentally, I had been working with one of the drug companies in the UK to bring a representative over to talk about respiratory disease. Not just necessarily strangles, but equine flu, equine herpes, etc., etc. That talk has been arranged for the evening of the 11th of October. It's a Wednesday evening. It's going to be held up at the Craignabar, and we'll be starting about 7 p.m. We will be talking about respiratory disease with the representative from MSD in the UK, and we will be talking about biosecurity on the Isle of Man, and I will be giving advice about strangles on that evening. So it's open to all horse owners. Do come along, but we are capping the figures at 65 because of the size of the room. So first come, first served basis. So put it in your diary, October the 11th, 7 p.m. up at the Craignabar. Come and get some very good information that will allow you to make very good decisions about your horse in the future.
From my side, I think I've got everything that I need. Is there anything you'd like to add or say?
And no, it's just that I would say that strangles is not endemic on the Isle of Man. So in other words, we don't have many cases. Professionally, we would see maybe 1-2 horses a year with it. So very, very sporadic. And I think that's the most important thing for people to remind themselves of, that it isn't a common disease. And if we shut down the entry, in other words, be very careful of horses coming in from the UK, theoretically we shouldn't have strangles at all on the Isle of Man.
Thank you for making it to the end of the Little Manx Radio newscast. You are obviously someone with exquisite taste. May I politely suggest you might want to subscribe to this and a wide range of Manx Radio podcasts at your favourite podcast provider, so our best bits will magically appear on your smartphone. Thank you.